did Moses, Joshua, and other Old Testament authors walk around with pen and papyrus? Or the New Testament authors, were they following Jesus with notepads of some sort, like they're depicted in The Chosen? And then I have go ahead.
Well, like they're depicted in The Chosen. I think that's kind of funny. Well, I don't know if they walked around with it or what they did. I know Moses I'm sure they carried things with them, but I don't, when I am, and in my mind, I can't speak to this absolutely categorically, but I think Moses had a lot of time on his hands, for example, because of the wilderness wanderings. And he, 40 years in the wilderness. So he just sat down and would go into his tent, his sukkah. He would take out his papyrus, or his, actually probably was more leather than papyrus, his skin that he would write on, and then he would write there. I don't think he carried around with him like a memo book. And the same thing, I don't know, I haven't seen that part of The Chosen where they carry around paper. But I think the same thing that, first of all, because writing and reading was common, but billboards and all the different things that we see all the time, it wasn't quite as common. So people had a much greater memory. And so they would really work to remember and memorize what they saw and heard. And I think as a result of that, then they would go and write it down after they memorized it. And so what you have when Matthew writes the book of Matthew, somewhere I think in the mid-40s, I put it very early, in the mid-40s, about 12, 13 years after the resurrection of Jesus. He's writing it down from memory. And maybe he had taken some notes through the years after, let's say he heard the Sermon on the Mount and then he wrote it down. But then what he does when he writes his book, the first of the Gospels, he puts it together in a literary fashion. He's got a structure to it that he wants to follow. And so they're not writing down, they were not like
journalists, like at a press conference where they've got their notepads or their iPads now. Obviously, they wouldn't have had iPads, but where they have their little notebooks and they're just taking notes and writing down the quotes.
Yeah,
the same
even
way.
More so, they're not court stenographers, is what I wanted to say.
Okay.
Who get down every word exactly, even the uhs and the ums.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Now, you had mentioned, my follow-up to this is you had mentioned a few weeks ago, we had talked about the people that it was some passing comment, but I was teaching through my Sunday school class, teaching about the Exodus and the wilderness time in the Pentateuch, and Moses had selected 70 leaders to help him lead, and they had even leaders. There were like leaders to the, a leader for the hundreds and a leader for the down to the tens kind of a thing to take
tens, yeah.
Yes, to help him lead these people and answer these questions that they had that he just didn't need to spend his time on while he was also leading these people through. And you made some passing comment about that may have been so that he could be writing down the law. I was like, what? Like that had. I've never actually thought about, like, when would he have written all of these words, which I have to imagine the specificity of the law in the Pentateuch and those first, those Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, those would be very important, much like a court stenographer. But that you were like, that would be part of the reason that he didn't need to settle these disputes between brother and brother or different tribes and things. And he also needed to write down the first 5 books of the Bible. And I was like, oh, you're right. Because he has to do that before he dies. He dies at the end. So somewhere he has written that down.
And I think it's really important to understand the Torah. It's one book, really, Genesis, in 5 volumes. And it's a story. Yeah. And, you've got creation. You've got the patriarchs. You've got the deliverance from Egypt. You've got that whole story. Then all of a sudden laws get dropped in. I like to consider it. So think about it. I think Moses was very quick to write down the laws as he received them from God, like when he went up on top of Mount Sinai, he wrote them down. But that's really not the Torah. What the Torah is, he took those laws and dropped them into the narrative. It's like the way when I teach at Moody, I show a screen with the narrative, just a timeline with the different creation and primeval history, patriarchal history, redemptive history from Exodus, wanderings, and then a bag of laws gets dropped in it, and the timeline kind of animates and goes all around the bag of laws. And it's a book about the law. It's a story of how God gave the law to Israel. It's not the law itself; it's the story about the law.
Okay.
And there's real literary art in that book. One of the things that you can see is that there's a long narrative. Then this happens 4 times. Long narrative, long story. Then there's a poem or a song, like in Genesis 1 through 48, and then there's Genesis 49, this oracle in poetic fashion by Jacob. Then there's an epilogue, the death of Jacob and Joseph. And then you start the next story, which is the enslavement in Egypt and God's deliverance, then the Song of Moses, and then the travel to Sinai is the epilogue. And then you've got the next story, and it goes on like that. And so it shows narrative, poem, epilogue. It shows structure. Moses wasn't just saying, where do I dump the laws?
Right.
He had a whole strategy in what he was doing.
And I think even the reminder that the Bible has structure. Each book has structure, and each author, even if they had written down notes, they went back and they added the structure, or they wrote it with structure, depending on who it was. They may have done that too. But that it's not just, like I think we think about those first 5 books, like, oh, this is the law. Okay. And I just have to slug through it, and it's really hard. I've been surprised in teaching through it that how many stories, I've read it before, but how many stories are in there? This narrative that you're talking about is there, and then there's, 2 or 3 chapters of laws or more.
Yep.
But often I think at this time of the year, this beginning part of the year, people can get lost in, oh no, I have to read through all of these laws. And in even just the idea is overwhelming, and so they may not even start, or they'll just skip it. But there is a lot of narrative in there.
Yeah,
like
and they're blocks of laws. That's very interesting to me.
Yes.
They're whole sections, and then they have narrative. One of the things you're going to find is every time Israel sins, they get another block of law. And the sin leads to the next block. And the point of that is someone, I think it may, well, I know it was Paul in the book of Galatians, the law was added because of transgression.